recorded. We're very excited to have Kimi here, especially so last minute. Thank you so much for coming. And I'll let you go ahead and introduce yourself. You're going to be sharing content, correct?
Yeah. I can share my screen.
You can go ahead. Yeah, you can go ahead. I've just made you a host.
Okay, cool. Hi, everybody. Hope you're all doing well and staying safe and staying indoors. My name is Kimi. I am a member of TLC's Young Adult Action Council, and I am the chair of our Scientific Literacy Committee. And full disclosure, I pulled these slides together in the past 90 minutes. So I don't have a whole lot. This is kind of off the cuff, but I know a lot about BFRB research, and I also know a lot about spaceflight and Antarctica because I took a class on it last semester. And there are a lot of gems in that body of literature that have helped me stay sane over the past week and a half in this self-isolation. So I figured I would just jump on here and share them with you guys and see if you can't get something out of them yourselves. So I'm about to share my screen.
One quick thing I forgot to mention. Yeah. So if anyone has any questions, you can be sure to open up your chat. It's in the control bar at the bottom of your Zoom screen. If you find that you're not able to find it, just shoot me a message and I'll be happy to help. And again, we'll be taking questions towards the end of the presentation. And enjoy. Thank you so much, Kimi.
Yeah, of course. So like I said, this is pretty off the cuff, so it won't take the whole hour. Please feel free to jump in with your questions anytime. And I might ask some questions of you guys, so drop them in the chat if you think you have a good answer. So I was thinking about this a lot for the past couple weeks, sitting at home by myself, and what is something that us being in quarantine has to do with having a BFRB and being in space or in Antarctica or someplace really remote. I actually think I would like you guys to drop answers in the chat. What do you think all of these things have in common? I did some thinking about all of these, and there are a couple of different things that I came up with. One of them is that they're probably all a little bit anxiety inducing, like a little bit more than day-to-day life probably. There's probably a little bit of stress. There's probably a little bit of feelings of aloneness. But the main thing that I'm going to focus on that all these three things have in common is that they're all really isolated environments. And
Hey everyone, I think we had a little technical difficulty, so just hang 1 second and Kimi will be right back.
Hey, Leslie.
She's coming back, but I am bringing her back on as a panelist.
Ah, okay.
Hi, I'm back. Sorry. I don't know what happened. I got booted off of my network, I think.
No worries. I'm going to go ahead and make you a host now so you can share your screen, okay?
Okay. All right. I think we're back in business. Where did I drop off? Do you guys remember?
You had just focused on the isolation, the similarities in isolation between the three subjects.
Okay. Yeah, so isolation is the one that I'm going to be focusing on. And with BFRBs, it's a little bit more abstract because it's not an isolated environment. It's more like the isolated environment is in your head because we all think we're the only people in the world who do what we do. And that's obviously not the case, but we can't help but feeling the way we do. So why do I know so much about space in the first place? I took a class on the neurophysiology of spaceflight last year for my master's, and I fell absolutely in love with it. And my heart is set on researching BFRBs, but if I were to research any other thing, it would probably be space. So since times are tough, and I think we all need a little bit of something to distract us from what's going on, I have a nice little video about sunrise and sunsets from the International Space Station. And this is, like, to me, the coolest thing ever. So I hope the audio will work, but if not.
Hey, Kimmy, I'm not able to hear any audio.
Okay.
So.
I think, can you hear me still though?
Yeah, of course.
Okay, cool. So the cool thing about the ISS is that the sun rises and sets every like 90 minutes. So what you're seeing in the video is real time, what it looks like from up there. So one of the things that got me interested in this whole area of research is the question of why do humans explore? And over the course of my class, which I paid a tremendous amount of money for just to learn that it's because we can. There's really no more complicated explanation than that. We have an evolutionary drive as human beings to push the envelope of human discovery always. And I don't think that's something that's ever going to change about us as a species. So there will always be researchers as long as there are human beings. And that is kind of a comforting thought for me as I'm watching the news coverage of COVID and paying attention to which companies are starting clinical trials and which treatments are being developed right now. So that has brought me the slightest bit of peace in all of this uncertainty. And along with that, oh Jesus. And so just a fun little tidbit about where we're headed. Once this is all over, the plan, I think, from NASA is to get human beings on the moon by the end of this decade, which has just started. So we have plenty of time. But to reiterate my point about space being a really lonely place, right now, missions are only to low Earth orbit, which means you can be up there for probably no more than a year until you come back down. But for a mission to Mars, those are anticipated to take 2 to 3 years round trip. So imagine how stifling it feels right now to have been at home for 2 weeks, and then imagine being on a spacecraft headed to Mars for the next 3 years. Really kind of puts it in perspective, I think. And you don't have to go to space to experience an environment like that. Antarctica is much the same. It is the coldest, highest, driest, darkest, loneliest place in the entire world. The continent itself is bigger than the entire country of the United States. And there are actually 0 residents of Antarctica, meaning it is nobody's home. Everybody who's there is a citizen of someplace else. There are a ton of research stations, and pretty much everybody there is there to do research. And most people come towards the end of the fall and they stay for the winter because it's too dangerous to leave during the winter, and then they leave during the spring. So there's another group of individuals who come for quote unquote summer school, and then you have the people who stick it out for most of the year. And the other thing about Antarctica is that it all looks the same. What you see is what you get. You can see kind of on the horizon there that it looks the exact same as far as the eye can see, and they actually call it white Mars because of how homogeneous the terrain is. And this guy's out here just trying to enjoy his top ramen. Concordia is one of the stations in Antarctica. It is the closest thing that we have to living on another planet. The temperatures can drop to -80 degrees Celsius, and there is a period of about 4 months when the sun just does not rise because it's so close to the South Pole. So the groups of people who stay for the winter are used to very wonky changes in their sleep and in their circadian rhythms because they're used to the sun being up either all the time or completely gone for stretches of many months. And no supplies can arrive in the winter either, so it's pretty much every man for himself out there. And so this is kind of the prime place where people do research on extreme and isolated environments. So we have a lot of data coming out of places like Concordia that can help us sort of deal with our own crisis situations at home. So this is what we're all sick of hearing about right now. As of a few days ago, we hit over 2,000 cases of COVID-19 in the United States. And I'm sure you guys have all seen this graph before. The interesting thing about this graph, I think, in all the places that I've seen it, is that it does not have an x-axis. So when you see the number of days as units on the horizontal part of the graph, it doesn't say how many days this is expected to last, whether with social measures or without. So I don't mean to scare anyone, but the question of how long will it last, I don't think anybody has a good answer to it. It could be a month, it could be 3. I mean, China took 3 months to stop having new cases, and today is the day that no new cases have been reported in China. And we are only less than a month in, if you can believe it. So I think we really have to sort of settle in and buckle up and be ready to take care of ourselves and live in a little bit of a different way in the long term. And so tying it back to BFRBs, when we talk about physiology and we talk about isolation, the body does not operate in a vacuum. It is very much informed by what we think, and what we think is often informed by our body just as much. One of the areas that's begun to interest me a lot the past few years as I've been studying the BFRB literature is this idea of psychodermatology, which is the medical link between your brain and your skin. So we often don't really think about those two things as body systems that interact a whole lot, but they're a little bit more pertinent to people like us than people in the general population. And the network in which they all interact is called the neuroimmunocutaneous endocrine network. So it's the biological pathway between what's happening to you in your environment, your nervous system, and your skin. So your skin is actually a really highly sensitive receptor in a couple different ways. So this feedback loop, it goes both ways. So something external can happen that makes you stressed, and receptors in your skin are highly receptive to the neuroendocrine signals, and that triggers a reaction, which some of us might think of in various skin conditions. But it can also be the other way around, which as we with BFRBs, we know that our skin can sometimes be the stressor. And so our skin stresses us out and we release endocrine signals, and it all cycles back to our skin and it triggers an endless cycle. But the point is that all these body systems are connected. And sometimes if you want to reach one, you have to act on something that seems a little bit unrelated, but that'll feed downstream through this loop. Habit reversal training. Raise your hands quickly in the chat if you've heard of this before. I'm hoping most of you have. Awesome. Cool. So this is something you should get familiar with if you aren't already. It is pretty much the gold standard behavioral technique that we have in treating BFRBs. And it's an excellent thing because it's not something that you need necessarily to go to a treatment provider to do. I mean, there are people who are very well equipped to help you learn these tools, but at the end of the day, they are tools and you can practice them at home just as well as any other place. But the focus on HRT is changing behavior. So if you think BFRBs at their core are just behaviors, and bad habits is a little bit dismissive, but if you want to stop your BFRB, there are ways to do that from a purely behavioral standpoint. So the main components of HRT are self-monitoring, which is exactly what it sounds like, taking note, usually marking every time you have an urge or every time you pull or pick, awareness training, which is something that Anila from Habit Aware, if you had the chance, actually I don't know when it is, to hear her talk about Keen and Habit Aware, that's exactly what they do, is bringing awareness to your behavior so that if it's something you don't know you're doing, maybe realizing you're doing it is the key to stopping. Stimulus control is literally physically preventing engaging in the bad behavior. So think of things like wearing gloves, wearing hats, wearing wigs, makeup, anything like that. That all falls under the umbrella of stimulus control. And then you have competing response training, which is doing something completely different. So anything that you can think of to keep your hands occupied, that is an example of competing response. I've got my little cube right here because I'm really nervous. So this is my competing response right now. So the first two components of HRT are really to reduce automaticity, which is making the behavior less automatic and more in conscious awareness where you can do more with it. And then the last two are to override the existing behavior itself. And then the other really great model of BFRBs that is worth practicing in times like this is the comprehensive behavioral or COMB model. Now raise your hands in the chat if you've heard of this one. This one is also pretty terrific. And if I might say, it's even better than HRT because it factors in emotions, which we all have, and for most of us, they do contribute directly to our BFRB. So the way COMB works is it breaks BFRBs down into 5 different domains, and all of them might contribute, and usually figuring out which domains affect you is half the battle. So there's sensory domains, like if certain textures make you want to pick or pull. There's cognitions. So if you think, I'm going to make sure every hair on my head is perfect, that is an example of a cognition. Affective, just another word for emotions. So those are the people who pick or pull when they're angry or stressed or upset. And then there's motor, the kind of like basic, almost tick-like motor behaviors. And then the last one is place. So if there's a certain environment that, like, you always pull at work or always at the end of the day, or when you're sitting down watching TV, those are things to be aware of. And each of these domains has their own specific strategies that you can employ to sort of tackle it from all different angles. So here's another little visual of the SCAMP. So for sensory, you have visual, tactile, all of them. Cognitive is thoughts about hair, skin before, after, or during picking or pulling. Affect, like we said, has more to do with feelings. Motor and awareness has to do with repetitive movements, and they can be conscious or automatic. And then place or environment has to do with location or items in the environment. And I think this one is particularly pertinent to us during quarantine, because if we're in a high trigger situation, this one is really the one that is most likely to predispose us to pick or pull, even if we think that we've got everything else covered. So the good news is that the best strategies that we have to manage our BFRBs normally, the HRT, the COMB, other things, they're the same strategies that we should turn to now for the next little while to manage them during this pandemic. This is just a little excerpt from the TLC website. This is from like way back, 50 ways to stop pulling your hair. And a lot of these, you'll notice, these are tried and true. Keep your hands busy, brushing your hair, keeping track of your feelings, textbook self-monitoring. Make yourself busy. Too much downtime can be dangerous. I feel this in my soul with the quarantine. I've been trying really hard to keep myself busy, and I think you guys should too. So, bringing it back to the whole space thing, based on what I know about being on the ISS or being in Antarctica, these are some of the things that I've been trying to apply to my own quarantine strategy, especially when it comes to maintaining control over my BFRBs, because I am a skin picker, a hair puller, a nail biter, anything you can think of. First strategy is play the long game. And what I mean by that is don't take it a day at a time. Pick a date and plan against that date. So like I said, when I showed the flatten the curve graph, no one knows how long it's going to last. It could be a month, it could be 3 months, but this is like a type A person's worst nightmare. So pick a date and plan against that date, and that'll help you sort of manage your time and also manage your feelings. In Antarctica specifically, there's what's called third quarter syndrome, which is where in the third quarter of a winter over, that's when everybody starts to get really depressed because it's right after the halfway point and everybody's like, oh man, we still have like 3 more months of this. It's unbelievable. And everybody starts getting really depressed. But there's enough data about that they bring in extra resources during the third quarter. So if you're like, there's no way this is going to last past July 1st, then watch out for your third quarter and maybe plan to bring in some reinforcements around that time. And stock accordingly, according to that time. I think a lot of the hysteria with the supplies and things like that is because of the uncertainty again. So if you're like, I'm not expecting this to last for more than a month and I know I'm working from home for the next 2 to 3 weeks, stock for 2 or 3 weeks and no more, no less. And that way everybody has everything that they need. And then act incrementally. And by that, I mean, each day move yourself a little bit forward towards a goal rather than trying to do everything in one day. And I have this problem too. I try to set big goals for myself. Like, I'm going to read this like 700-page book, but you can't read it all in one day. You set aside like 30 minutes or an hour and you do a little bit each day. And that way, by the time you get to that end point, whenever it is, you can look back and say, hey, I really did a lot. So I ask at the bottom here, what strategies, just to get you guys to think a little bit about which of the HRT or COMB strategies are coming into play. And you don't have to answer me in the chat, but just think about it and think about which of those strategies you're going to use to play the long game. And here's a little bit more about third quarter syndrome. So when people first arrive in Antarctica, they're like really energetic and they want to explore everything and they go on runs and they're really excited. And then once it starts to really hit them what they're in for, they think, was this a good choice? Can I take it back? Usually the answer is no. Start to freak out a little bit. They start to really assess the good and the bad. And when it starts to get bad, they may become depressed, they may become a little bit aggressive. And of course, everybody's got their own thresholds for this. Some people have a higher tolerance for uncertainty or for boredom or what have you. So that's a good thing to assess with it is what is my personal threshold for boredom and stuff like that. And towards the middle, they start to accept that there's less flexibility, their energy goes down. You may start to see it in affected performance. And this is kind of a time that you want to bring in those reinforcements so that when the sun comes back, as it were, so from early May to early August, there is no sun. So it's technically winter down there in the southern hemisphere. But during that time, eventually the sun comes back. Then you start to get a little bit more reflective and start thinking ahead to the return to normalcy, which seems way, way far off to us now, but believe me, it will arrive before you know it. So play the long game. Strategy number 2, diversify your environment. Means mix it up. Keep yourself on your toes. I have started using my essential oil diffuser a ton and switching out a different scent every day just to kind of keep myself paying attention and things like that. So like now's a good time to rearrange your house or put up a new picture or change something just to keep it interesting. And the picture here is from the cupola on the ISS. It's a little hangout spot that's all windows pretty much that people like to hang out at. And a lot of astronauts report that they'll spend just hours of their free time sitting up here because, like I said, the Earth is spinning really fast beneath their feet and they never get bored of looking out this window. So find something new and exciting to occupy yourself from a sensory standpoint and diversify your environment. Strategy number 3, take care of yourself. This seems so trite and everybody talks about self-care, and I think it's the most annoying platitude, but it really is true. And there's really so much evidence to back this up, that taking care of yourself and doing even the unglamorous things is a really good way to maintain a sense of normalcy when your external environment is more uncertain. And in particular, there's a strategy called behavioral activation, which is actually a really well-validated treatment for depression. And it's used all over the place. And it's very simple, and it's just do things that make you happy. So now is the time to get back to all the hobbies that you really love that you might not have had time for lately, and just do things that bring you joy. And specifically, exercise is one that is very important. And I did a little bit of studying on how people exercise on the ISS. And so here's another little video that is not going to have audio, but it shows an astronaut on the ISS running on a treadmill in microgravity, which I think is cool. So enjoy.
The International Space Station. As all of my family and friends know, I love to ride.
Oh, Jesus Christ. Look at her go. So astronauts on the ISS actually work out for 2 hours a day, and that is because in microgravity, your muscles and bones aren't putting in the effort that they do on Earth to keep you upright. So those muscles and joints become largely inactive, and astronauts experience in 1 month the amount of bone loss that a postmenopausal woman would experience in a whole year. So it's really serious, and in order to keep up with the demands of their training, it requires them to do a lot of exercising and mostly weight training, and it's a very regular thing and an integral part of their training routines. So that is to say, don't just sit in bed all day. Please get up, walk around, move your bodies. Very important. The next strategy, strategy number 4, is human interaction. And it seems counterproductive because of all the social distancing, but humans are social creatures, and especially astronauts. They're selected for their personality traits, like being really agreeable and being able to work as teams, but also being able to act when the moment calls for it and things like that. But it's still, at the end of the day, a very small group of like maybe 6 people, 7 people, and you end up becoming extremely close with those people. And it all depends on the dynamic of the group, and people's tensions can get high. So it's all about using the people around you to your advantage, because it really is one of the most difficult things for us as human beings is to be alone. So the photo is of 2 astronauts on the ISS eating Christmas dinner, and their dinner is floating. So I feel this because all of my roommates are home. I have 3 roommates, and I am so grateful for them, because if I had to be whiling away this time all by myself, I don't know what I would do. So if you don't have 3 roommates, call your friends, call your parents, post on social media, do anything you can to stay connected in this world, because I think a lot of people are using this time to reach out and stay connected, and it's really actually a beautiful thing. And then strategy number 5, this is very important. Keep your circadian rhythm regular. This is a Corona schedule that one of my coworkers made. And scheduling is extremely important for maintaining a sense of normalcy. And actually astronauts have their schedules highly regimented. And the reason for this is because, like I said, the sun rises and sets from the ISS every 90 minutes. So they're seeing a large number of fluctuations in any given day. And they, if it's unregulated, they do what's called free running, which means that they'll be up for 24 hours and they won't sleep. And then their body will be extremely confused about when to go to sleep and when to wake up. So the best way to trick your body into doing what you want it to is to keep a really regimented routine. And with that, having a morning routine, having a bedtime routine, those things become really important because they sort of ease you into and out of the day. And then sleep aids, not necessarily the best example because a lot of astronauts do like take melatonin and things like that to get to sleep. But if you find that you need a little bit of extra help, use your tried and true methods for getting to sleep, because that is an extremely important part of not devolving during a time like this. And it's important to stay consistent as the days and months come on. And last, but certainly not least, is look on the bright side, which is also easier said than done. But the term for this is salutogenesis. So if you think, if you're familiar with scientific terminology at all, pathogenesis is the word that we use to talk about disease and things that detract from human well-being. Salutogenesis is the opposite of this. It's factors that promote human well-being. So these are the things that have to do with human flourishing. So even in a strange, uncertain, and irritating situation such as this, there are good things that come out of it, right? So it could be a way to put into practice some of the things that you've learned, especially about coping with stress. I know I am using every single strategy that my therapist has told me and trying them out and seeing what I like best now that it's showtime. Improved health and personal growth. So I actually do feel like this is the best I've taken care of myself in a long time, now that I have the time and I'm home. And if nothing else, it is a great story, because if you ask these people who have spent time in extreme environments, like people who have been on the ISS or people who have spent a winter in Antarctica in negative 80 degrees Celsius, and you ask them, would you do it again? They always say yes. And they always come out of it having felt like they gained something more valuable than any of the inconveniences that they experienced. And I think we're going to have a great story to tell once this dumpster fire of a pandemic is all over. So I will leave you guys with this image, one of my favorite images of all time. I don't know if any of you are already familiar with this, but one of the early Apollo missions, they sent a spacecraft all the way out to the edge of our solar system, so out past Pluto. And they turned it around and they timed it just perfectly so they could take a picture of the Earth. And I don't know if you guys can see my cursor, but if you guys see right in this bar here, this tiny, tiny dot, that is the entirety of our planet. And if that's not the coolest thing that you've ever seen, I don't know what to tell you. But it's important to keep perspective in times like these. And one of the things that I've noticed so far about this pandemic is that it's really something that literally everybody has in common. I don't think I've ever seen something that people can universally relate to more than having to be at home and like the memes and the same complaints and things like that. And that's been kind of nice, I'm not even gonna lie. So just to recap a little bit, the ISS, Antarctica, and this COVID quarantine are all pretty lonely places, but they don't have to be. Periods of isolation impact our brains and our bodies, but there are many ways to mitigate this impact. We talked about 6 of them. I'm certain that there are a lot more that I didn't even touch on. And HRT and COMB are 2 great frameworks for BFRB specific strategies that you can practice at home during quarantine. So now is really the time to find out what works for you, and best of luck. So thank you very much, and I'll take some questions now. Leslie and Amy, are you guys still on?
Yep, I'm here.
Cool.
You have a question in the Q&A from Grace. Do you want me to, well, it's a comment. Do you want me to read it to you?
I can read it. Okay. So group chats among the college in place of normal hangouts could be helpful. I certainly agree with that. I think it goes back to the keeping human contact part. So definitely go for it. Does anybody else have any questions about any of this?
You can type your questions in the chat box.
Yeah. Oh, this is the chat box. Cool. Oh. Okay. Home is helping people. That's great. Okay. The third quarter, totally accurate. So you heard it here. Watch out. Plan for when you think your third quarter is going to be. The recording will be available in a day or so, and everyone will get the link. Resources / links to COMB. Leslie, what do we have as far as resources?
I think the best resource that I'm going to find it right now on our website, but if you go to bfrb.org, under the Find Help and Support tab, there's a link to articles and videos. And we have a huge library of articles and videos about all kinds of things. But you'll find a lot about COMB under treatment and recovery. There's some great, I don't think if I chat it, I can send it to you all, but there's a great article called Help Yourself on bfrb.org that explains an outline of what COMB is from a self-help perspective. And you can also search for it just using the search bar on the website. I'm looking for the other one. Oh, it's this, there's a self-help strategies section in that articles library. And there's a dozen or more tips on how to use COMB and how to identify what your COMB profile might be with specific strategies under each of those domains Kimi mentioned.
Nice, thank you, Leslie. Okay, moving on. What are some examples of number 2, diversify your environment at home? So you could like put up a new poster or change the arrangement of your room. You could like get some plants or like open your window, hang out by your window and listen to what's going on out there. Like I said, I use my essential oil diffusers because I really like different smells. Anything that has to do with sensory. Another really good thing is if you're the type of person who uses fidgets, which I do, maybe mixing up your fidgets is another really good way because that way you get different texture and you can stay engaged that way. Will we be able to contact you still if we have questions after this is over? Absolutely. So my email is kimmy@bfrb.org. Feel free to shoot me an email if you have any questions. Following Stephen's question, how can you effectively do this in a small space? It doesn't have to be an enormous thing. It can be as little as adding like a new little decoration or lighting a candle, or I think it's still very possible to do in a small space. Charles Mansueto's recent book, Overcoming BFRBs, he's a superstar. I would not be surprised if that was a great book. For different environment stuff, maybe, oh, this is a good one too. Experiment with different flavors or new foods in cooking, or trying new different exercises or routines. I think that's terrific too. With the foods, we've definitely been mixing it up at my house. Each of us have been taking turns cooking for everybody, which is really nice. So yes, highly, highly recommend. All right, I think that's all the questions. Feel free to, oh, sweet drink recipe. We're a coffee household, so we don't do sweet drinks. We just drink iced coffee at all hours of the day. Thanks everybody for tuning in. Feel free to go to the community room or shoot me an email, and enjoy the rest of this little mini conference. Bye everybody.
Thank you so much,
Thank you.
Kimi.
Thanks.